must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got comedian Jimmy Dore. You might know him from the Young Turks. He's also the author of Your Country Is Just Not That Into You, The Media, Wall Street, and both political... Oh, fuck, I fucked that up. How the media, Wall Street, and both political parties keep screwing you even after you moved on. And he's also the host of The Jimmy Dore Show, which you can find on any podcast app like Podcast Addict or iTunes or wherever. And it's hilarious. It's a great combination of social issues and talking about current events and stuff like that, and also just a bunch of hilarious segments and skits. So definitely check that out. And like I always tell you guys in the show description, if you guys go on our YouTube channel, you can just look up the Ripple Effect Podcast or look up RV Theory 6, which is also my Twitter handle. You can find underneath the show the links to our guests' work, their websites, all that stuff, and also to my other work like Theory 6 Music Project and my Facebook account and all that stuff. So definitely check that out if you want to support the show. Of course, you can purchase Theory 6 Music. All that money goes to keeping the show going. So awesome show. He's a hilarious guy. Hopefully you guys really enjoy it. Also, I just want to take a second to apologize for the last couple episodes in case I've sounded more scatterbrained or had even a harder time gathering my thoughts and getting my ideas out than I usually do. I've just had some stuff going on in my personal life, and like many of you listeners, I have a full-time job, which is physically and mentally draining. And then obviously when things happen, real things happen in your personal life, it can kind of fuck you up a little bit. So it kind of fucked me up a little bit. Maybe I'm just overanalyzing, but I just really care about the show. And I know if you guys are taking the time to listen to it, I want to be able to say that I'm proud of what I'm putting out there and say that it's definitely worth listening to. So hopefully you guys always get something out of this show. Even if I'm not the best public speaker, or sometimes I mispronounce things, or sometimes I don't get quotes or statistics 100% correct. But hopefully you guys appreciate the fact that I'm a real person who is no different than anybody else listening, and just trying to do my best to try to start my own ripple and spread some interesting information. And also from a selfish point of view, also get the chance to talk to a bunch of people I'm a huge fan of. So hopefully you guys understand that, and I'm sure you do, because honestly, I get nothing but awesome comments on Facebook, Twitter, 100% of the time, maybe not 100% of the time, but 90% of the time, I get nothing but really positive comments and people contact me. So I really, really appreciate it. And I love all you guys who are listening, and hopefully this podcast, just like all the podcasts I listen to, sparks thought, helps you self-analyze, self-correct, and have a better understanding of yourself and the world around you. And if it doesn't do any of that, then listen for the simple reason of just laughing at my fuck-ups and laughing at the fact that so many smart people come on the show and have a conversation with a dumbass like myself. And sometimes I'm even curious on why they come on. Hopefully they just like the listeners, hopefully they just realize I'm very sincere and I really care about trying to make a difference. And I really believe that we all can. Also, I made some Ripple Effect bumper stickers if you want one. I only got a limited amount, but the first ones to hit me up and want one, then let me know. I'll send one for free. And so do that. And the only thing I ask in return is either throw me a suggestion for a guest, or after, just promise me once you put it on your toolbox or your car or whatever, then you'll send me a picture so I can share it. And I think that's it for now. So have a great weekend. Well, I don't know when the fuck you'll be listening to this. So have a great day. And once the weekend comes, have a great weekend. And I'll see you on the next one. Peace. with me. I really appreciate it.
How you doing?
Good. Thanks for being with me. I know it's hard to do any of these things on Saturdays because most of us just want to drink and go out and enjoy ourselves. But thank you so much for taking your Saturday afternoon time to be with me.
No problem. My pleasure.
I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge stand-up fan. One thing I love about this podcast is I get to be a little selfish and get to talk to people I'm a fan of and just kind of pick at their brain and bullshit. But some of my favorite people to talk to are musicians and comedians because I think there's something about the way they analyze themselves for their work and the way they analyze the world around themselves that makes them interesting and they have interesting perspectives. So it's always fun to have comedians on. And let's get right into it with your stand-up career because for some of the listeners who aren't familiar with your stand-up career and some of your past work, you've done some Comedy Central specials. I know your first one was way before you really got into like social issues and political issues. But where'd you grow up doing stand-up and what East Coast, West Coast, and some of the clubs you played at?
So I started in Chicago, early 90s, and I did comedy there for about 4 or 5 years. And I moved out to Los Angeles 1995. And everything it went really well. I got hooked up with an agency, and I started getting on TV, Comedy Central, Make Me Laugh, and what else did I do for them? They did a bunch of stuff. NBC's Friday night, the videos, they used to have comedians on there, so I was on NBC a lot. And and then there was a show called Late Friday, also they would have on NBC. I got to do that. So I think things went really well, and then I did my first special for Comedy Central. Well, what was funny was they used to have a show called Premium Blend.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I think they used to call it Live at Gotham and maybe something else now. But Premium Blend used to shoot at the Hudson Theater on Broadway in Manhattan. And I was there August of 2001, which was right before September 11th, right? So that was wild for me to be there and then have that happen. And then I did my first special, my half-hour Comedy Central Presents in 2004. Yeah, 2004. That was it. And then let's see. I started doing that's when the UCB Theater, I don't know if you've heard of them, but the UCB, they opened up in Los Angeles. They started in New York. They're originally from Chicago. And Matt Besser and Amy Poehler, and so they started, and they asked me if I would do a show there. So I had to come up with a show, and that's when I started doing a show called Pop and Politics. When I started using video in my show and stuff like that. So, and I did that for a couple of years, and that led to my first hour special. So that's when I really started getting political because of that show. I had to talk about, I was watching the news and I had to talk about stuff. And so let me see. Then I got my hour special out of that called Citizen Jimmy. And, that did really well. It got won some awards and what have you. So that got my name out there. People so that really helped. Oh, I also in the middle of that did the Marijuana Logs with Tony Kameen and Doug Benson and Arj Barker. And that was great. I got to do that off Broadway, and I got to go to Australia and travel around doing that show. That was a blast. So I had a lot of really cool, fun things happen. It all kind of worked out. Now I have a radio show, and so then I was going in to promote my show at the UCB Theater, at this radio station called KPFK here in Los Angeles. And anyway, after went on and promoted, the station director offered me a show right afterwards. He said, "Hey, we'd like you to do a show here." So that was a good interview. And so I've been doing the Jimmy Dore show there. Maybe 5 years, 6 years now. And the first thing I did was with Todd Glass, as far as that goes. We did a podcast together with Steph Zamorano called Comedy and Everything Else.
Your wife did that with you too, right?
Yeah, that's Steph Zamorano was my wife.
Oh,
and,
okay, yeah.
And Todd Glass. And Todd was with us for about the first 60 episodes. And then we did about another 110 episodes after he left. And then when I started working with these people called the Young Turks. Yeah. So they're a online news show, and their claim to fame is they have 2 billion views, and so they're by far the biggest online news content provider.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of Young Turks.
Yeah, so I love them, and I get to be exactly who I am, and they love me. So I started working with them and my show over there, and I just got too busy, so we stopped doing comedy and everything else. But it's so funny; people still request to join the fan page over at Facebook. Oh, every week there's a couple of people over, and people still tell me. Like, I just ran into a guy last night at the Steve Allen Theater. We were doing a show there at Laura Keitlinger, and he was telling me how he goes back and listens to old episodes of comedy and everything else. And he goes, "It's just the right episode at just the right time." And I'm like, wow, that's really flattering, to think that someone does that. So yeah, and then it brings me up to the Jimmy Dore. I did one more special, which is supposed to be coming out on Netflix very soon. It's called Sentence to Live. And so that's just a twist on a story about I thought I was dying, and I didn't. And so I did that, and that should be coming out soon. That'll be my second hour special. And so that brings you up to date. Here we are.
Yeah, I mean, did you like being on? Do you like being on the road? Do you like the the lifestyle? Because I know it can be kind of it can be kind of hard, especially if you're married or have kids or whatnot. I know some comedians actually enjoy it. They like just going around and meeting people and touring and stuff like that. But how was your experience? Did you enjoy the whole go playing clubs and stuff like that?
I did. I loved it. It was, what else am I going to be doing? And it was the best thing in the world. Beats working, and it was great. I loved it. And then I don't know. I hit a certain. Well, after I turned maybe 40, 45, it became a grind. Traveling is a grind. After 9/11, traveling's just a grind and all that. It's just such a pain in the ass. And so I've been traveling less and less and less. But I get, because I have a radio show here in LA, I get to do more stand-up in town. And so I'm still doing a lot of stand-up. I'm just not traveling as much as I used to. And I'm enjoying that right now, actually.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was going to ask you, too, if you still do a lot of stand-up. And I know you're a busy guy with the Young Turks and your radio show. And for listeners who aren't familiar with the Jimmy's radio show, you can actually subscribe to it on any podcast app, iTunes or whatnot. And I listen to it. It's fucking hilarious. I love when you have the Mel Gibson call-ins and Vince Vaughn's. It's just, and recently Bernie Sanders. It's hilarious. I mean, you guys just do a great job. There's a lot of great podcasts out there. And there's a lot of comedians. I think that's one of the reasons why I think podcasts really took off, because comedians are just so good at it. I think they're so used to just telling stories and I think the combination of like talking about some serious stuff, but yet still, being able to throw some jokes in there and never taking things too seriously. I think that's what people love about it. I mean, your show, that's one thing I love about your show, because you talk about real issues, but you're always laughing, so it's entertaining, and it's not just monotone and boring and kind of depressing. It kind of, you can listen to it, kind of get some news on what's going on right now if you're not keeping up with it, and still have a good laugh.
Well, I appreciate you saying all those nice things. Mike McRae does most of the voices on the show, so he's a real gifted impressionist, and he really nails the impressions. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And so, yeah, I'm really proud of him. Frank Conniff is on the show from Mystery Science Theater 3000. Everyone knows him from that show. And he's such a quick wit, and he's so funny. And he also writes for the show. So Robert Yasamura also is a great writer. He's on the show. And Mark Van Landuit writes for the show. So it's of course, Steph Zamorano. She brings a great perspective to the show, being a Hispanic and a female. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you saying the nice things about my show. A lot of work goes into it, and some people notice it. And whenever someone does, I'm really thrilled.
Yeah, you can definitely tell it's not just, hit record and have a conversation, even though there's some of that, but you can tell that, just all the skits and all the segments is just really well thought out, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. I love seeing you on. I've had Dave Rubin on. I love seeing you on Dave Rubin's show on the Young Turks, because I think there's something about comedians, like even Lee Camp. Lee Camp's another one that, has this show on Redacted Tonight on RT, and he shows up on The Big Picture with what's his name, Tom Hart and Hartman, and it just there's something about comedians. They're just they have such a interesting perspective, and I think some of that is just the analyzing of things and kind of being able to kind of make fun of yourself and not having to, I mean, you're at the end of the day, you're a comedian. It's no different than like Joe Rogan or somebody else where just like, well, if you fuck up on a statistic or whatever, it's like, well, you know, you can't be that mad. You're a comedian. You don't do it for a living, you know? So I think it's fun because it's that very, you talk about topics, but it's a very casual, just like you're hanging out at the bar, having a drink with your friends type of conversation where you're not, you know, we wouldn't bust each other's balls about being off, you know, a number with a specific statistic or whatnot. And so I like that. And growing up, did you like what were your influences? And I know with comedians, there's a lot of times when you first get into comedy, obviously it's really hard. I think comedy is one of the hardest things to get into, just to get up on stage and have a room full of strangers and trying to find something that makes everybody laugh when we all know that we all have different sense of humors. You know, I can watch a movie that I think is hilarious. Somebody else can watch a movie and hate it. I mean, it's one of the scariest things to go on stage and do that. When you first got into comedy, could you see yourself adopt, I should say, some of your influences and some of the people you're a fan of? And then when did you feel like you kind of became who you are today, when you found your niche and your style and all that?
Well, you know, it's funny. There's all different levels to stand-up comedy, right? So there's being, and somebody, I think Jerry Seinfeld gave this analogy that just like in sports, like some people play basketball, you're good enough to play on your high school team, but you're not good enough to play on college. Or some people are good enough to play on high school and then college, but they're not good enough to play pro. So that's just the way it is with comedy. Like, you're good enough to be funny around your friends and people who know you. Right? That's one level. That's like high school basketball. Then the next level is to be funny around people who don't know you. That's like college. And then the final level is that you can be funny around people who don't know you when on command. Like, the difference between me and that guy you know who's funny at work is that they can call me, the improv can call me and say, hey, Jimmy, I need you to come be hilarious from 9:15 to 9:45 tomorrow. Can you do it? Yes, I can do it. I don't need to, it doesn't require a certain second circumstances. You know, I don't have to be in the right place at the right, you know what I mean? So I have an act, I know how to do it, I know how to make things work. So that's the difference between being, I think, a professional comedian. And so when I started, yeah, I mean, you really don't know what you're doing. You're learning an art form by the seat of your pants. And there's very few other forms like that, you know. Even acting, everybody goes to acting class forever. Right? So comedians don't go to comedian class. You know, you just go do it.
Even though it does exist, right? Those classes for comedy, stand up. I know a lot of comedians who bash it. They're like, those classes are so ridiculous. You got to learn on stage and open mic nights and stuff like that. Yeah.
I mean, if someone needs a class because that makes them feel more comfortable to get started, that's one thing. But no, they're in general, they're not useful at all. And a lot of bad things get said in there too. And so you go to a class, you might as well just go to an open mic. There's just as many people at an open mic doing the same thing, having the same experience. The only difference is every once in a while, professional comedians show up at open mics and you can actually learn, you know, unlike a comedy class or something like that. So, yeah, I'm a very, you know, comedy classes can be fun, you know, for regular people who aren't really going to be a comedian. They're fine, right? People like to go people like to go take a painting class. I don't want to be a painter professionally, but I'd like to go take a class or take a pottery class, even though I know I'm not going to do pottery for a living. That's one thing, right? Yeah, go to take a comedy class for fun. But people who are serious about the business don't spend really any time in a comedy class.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Was there any comedians who like took you under their wing that kind of you know, when you were coming up? And I know other comedians love watching other comedians, and a lot of times you're doing clubs with each other and hanging out with other guys. Was there any guy that kind of took you under his wing and kind of gave you some tips and stuff? Anything that kind of stuck with you?
Well, you know what? I remember when I first worked. There's just so many things that happened when I first started. I would say when I worked with this guy named Larry Reed. And before I worked with him, I was really nice on stage. I was trying to be the Mr. Nice Guy, which that's not a bad way to go. But he was he was overly sarcastic. He knew how to, kind of offend a crowd in a funny way. And saying the opposite of whatever was the nice thing to say, he could make that funny. And so that really, I was like, oh, I would like to be more like that. And so that's kind of, and then I saw Bill Hicks live, and that really changed my life in a big way. It almost made me want to quit because he was so good that, I'm not kidding, like it really kind of depressed me. Like I thought that when I got into it, like maybe I could, if I would do everything right, I could be maybe the best, be one of the top comedians. And then I saw Bill Hicks, and I knew that it was going to be such a huge gap between him and everybody else, when it was.
Yeah.
And then luckily he died, so I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, I love Bill Hicks. I mean, it's amazing how the impact he made, and he didn't live that long, and
yeah.
He's one of the yeah.
I got to see him live a bunch of times. So a lot of people have opinions on him who never saw him live. So I don't really count their opinions that much. So if you've seen Bill Hicks live, maybe I don't know, I've seen him probably 60 times live.
Holy shit!
So I had a real good, idea of what he does and the effect he has on a crowd and his skill and all that stuff. So people who just maybe listen to his CD or see first of all, his HBO specials, it's very rare that a TV camera can capture stand-up comedy. And like Dennis Miller's Black and White special is one of those where it really captured him, and it was really well done. But most stand-up specials, they're not half as exhilarating as seeing the guy live. Just like watching a concert on video. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know how I got off on that, but but yeah. So I mean, if you see a Bill Hicks HBO, I think he did 4 HBO specials. They don't, and not that they weren't good. I just know how great he was in person. And so when I saw those specials, they seemed kind of flat to me because I knew how dynamic he was as a performer. Anyway, not to shit on those specials, just to let people know that there was a lot to that guy. Anyway, after seeing Bill Hicks, that kind of changed me. And it made me want to be the best I could be. It certainly, and then everybody was trying to be like Bill Hicks.
Yeah, I heard a lot of that. A lot of people said that after Bill Hicks, that a lot of people started sounding like Bill Hicks and adopting that style. And do you think that happens subconsciously? Like you're such a fan of somebody that you can accidentally start sounding like them, or do you think there was some people just trying to capitalize on his popularity?
I just think that he had pioneered a different kind of comedy, this angry comedy that Dennis Leary co-opted from Bill Hicks, right? So he took what Bill Hicks had and he made it commercialized. Like he made it palatable for soccer moms to watch, and they made them feel edgy. Yeah. That the guy who's railing against the corporation is also doing ads for, Shell and Nike and the Gap.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings for Dennis Miller.
Not Dennis Miller, I'm Dennis Leary.
I'm Dennis Leary, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Dennis Leary, yeah. Because it is funny, like you said, that, on stage he's saying one thing, and then, he's kind of reminds me of Kanye West, where he's always talking about big corporations and all this stuff, and then 2 seconds later he's taking a bunch of money from one. So
yeah, that became the style. Like a lot of guys were doing that, and that kind of, Dennis Leary just totally ripped off Bill Hicks, right? And so a lot of people were doing that. He made it popular in England. Dennis Leary. Anyway, so that's one of the big unknown stories in stand-up comedy. By the way, like people don't know that about him, and it's kind of annoying. But
about Dennis Leary.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I loved when Greg Giraldo on Tough Crowd busted his balls, because I was always kind of like, I didn't know if I was a huge fan of Dennis Leary. So when I was a huge fan of Greg Giraldo. He was one of the first comedians I really fell in love with, and so it was fun to watch him. Somebody who's really an artist and took comedy seriously, kind of bust the balls of somebody who didn't take it so seriously.
I saw that too. It was fantastic. Well, he revealed Dennis Leary. He did us a big favor, Greg Giraldo, right? Because there's a little window into who Dennis Leary was, a fucking unfunny bully.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, a guy who couldn't take a joke and then couldn't make one. And instead of making one, and then he tried to ridicule someone who actually was doing good comedy. It was everything he did in that segment revealed that his instincts are the opposite of a comedian, and they're the opposite of what they should be at every turn.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't want to throw this out here if it's not true. So But I'm pretty sure I heard that he was stealing jokes. He was one of the comedians that.
Yes, he ripped off Bill Hicks. I mean, he ripped off
not just his style, but his actual bits.
Yes.
Oh shit.
Yeah, that's weird. That's weird that you don't even know that. And it's so funny. Like all those guys from Boston, they just suck his dick because they all try to pretend like they have integrity and everything. And I love all those guys, right? They're all very funny, hilarious comedians, and they all pretend to have integrity. But as soon as Dennis Leary calls him, fuck, he's a big star. I love him.
Yeah.
He's a big star. He's a big star, and he is a big star.
Yeah, because I do love East Coast comedy. I love Nick DiPaolo's, even though I don't agree with any of his political views. And I
say the same thing. Nick DiPaolo is so funny. He's wrong about everything, but he's still very funny.
He is so wrong about everything. It's amazing the shit that he says, because he's that classic conservative where he just everything is propaganda towards the conservatives, and it's just like, oh, that's liberal propaganda, that's and it's just like, and then 2 seconds later he's saying he's down the middle, which is like the typical
yes,
the typical thing. Like anytime somebody has to explain to you that they're down the middle, they're about to tell you something that's probably one-sided, but they're trying to give credibility to their opinion by saying they're down the middle.
Yeah, no, he's definitely pro-corporate, anti-union, anti-worker, all that shit. It's very fascist, there's nothing progressive about. It's all regressive. It's all shit that we have to overcome to have a nice society. And they're just tricked by they just don't get it. They don't understand the exploitation. So they don't get what FDR did. They don't get the difference between FDR and Ronald Reagan, and they don't get the difference between Teddy Roosevelt and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was also no friend to the working man, and he exploded the prison industrial complex and military industrial, the whole fucking deal, right?
Yeah.
And he deregulated Wall Street, so he added to the income inequality, and so it's the problem is that there is no liberal party in America anymore. There's Barack Obama, who's a conservative, he's a nice moderate Republican, right? He gets elected. What does he do? He doesn't implement the liberal healthcare plan. He implements a Republican healthcare plan, and that's why I love when Bill Maher says, but he doesn't say it about Barack Obama. He says, "Well, wouldn't it be great? What would it be like to have a government that actually governed like a liberal?" When a Republican wins, we get conservative ideas. When a Democrat wins, we get conservative ideas. We never get fucking liberal ideas anymore. And that's what's wrong with this goddamn country, because that's why it keeps shifting to the right. And right now you're watching a party completely try to go off the cliff. Right now they want to take citizenship away from people who are legally born here. They want to repeal the Constitution. That they want to get brown shirt squad. This is for real. Every one of them said they want to go, and if you're born here, doesn't matter. You got to get out of this country. Where are they supposed to go? They're not a citizen anywhere else. Doesn't matter. We're going to get a bunch of brown shirt. That's fascism. That's how far to the right they are now. They're completely fucking fascist. They're going to start rounding up people and exporting them, because even if you're a citizen, you're not a citizen enough.
Well, the thing is, too, is that the Mexican debate's pretty interesting to me, because what I find interesting is that we're spending all this money overseas with issues that really don't concern us, and for the most part don't impact us and couldn't impact us with, ISIS. I mean, ISIS is very far from ever being, a threat to the U.S. And yet we have Mexico, which is a complete fucking mess. And we have many different interests in helping fix Mexico, because one, right on our border, Juarez, Mexico, is the most dangerous town in the world. I mean, I think it's like 1 out of 4 women get raped or murdered in their lifetime, which is fucking crazy that borders the U.S. And then they wonder why everybody's trying to come to the U.S. It's because their country's a fucking mess. If we actually invested in trying to help fix that country, instead of the cartels running the country, and also decriminalize some of the drugs in the U.S. So, and then we're not, because just like Prohibition made the mobsters tons of money with selling alcohol illegally, same thing we're doing with the Mexican cartels. They're making tons of money off marijuana and drugs coming into the U.S. because we haven't decriminalized it. So it's just, it kind of reminds me of, was that Gore Vidal documentary, The United States of Amnesia? It's they capitalize on the fact that we have awful long-term memory. You know, every 4 years or every 8 years, you know, they feed us the same bullshit. Oh, this, you know, this last Republican or this last Democrat sucks, so now you have to vote for the other political party. And then he sucks, and then 4 years later we forgot that they sold the same thing. And it's just like they keep capitalizing on the fact that we have a bad long-term memory. You know, it's just like Vietnam. You know, Iraq was our Vietnam, and we'll have another one eventually. You know, we'll have another one. We'll forget that the same way they sold us Iraq, they're selling us Iran, and it's the same people, and they're using the same type of bad information and really propaganda, because the media is a mess. And people overseas, I mean, my parents, I was born in Portugal, and my parents watched the Portuguese channel, and they get better international news watching that than they do watching CNN, Fox News, or MSNBC. They know what's going on in the world better than the average person who watches mainstream media. And so it's amazing how uninformed people are, how we forget things, how we constantly get just tricked into doing the same thing over and over again. And it's really, people have to look at it that when so many corporations control, or a handful of corporations control the media, I mean, they can sell us whatever they want. And really, unfortunately, the average man or woman, they have children, they have full-time jobs, they have, you know, they don't have time to research stuff. They don't have time to research history or research what's really going on. The fact that ISIS has U.S. weapons, and that the weapons were funneling to Syria, half of them got into ISIS's hands. And so we're fighting the same people that we're giving weapons to, and all this stuff. I mean, the average person is just way too busy. They, you know, we do a great job putting people in debt early, go to college, get in debt. Then finally you go through your long day of work, you put your kids to bed, then you put on CNN, and that's all the information you basically have the energy and time to consume for the day. So basically, if they can control that, then they control what you think, what you feel, the way, you know, your perspective on things. And it reminds me of that movie from, what was it, the 80s or 70s, Network, you know, and just this idea of how the tube is going to control what we eat, how we feel, our perspectives, everything. And so, I mean, I don't know where I was going with that rant, but just like yourself, I'm pretty passionate about the issues.
Well, you know, in 1980, there were 50 giant corporations that controlled all the media in the United States. And they were giant, and that's a lot. And now there's 6. So all those companies got bought by other companies and merged, and now there's 6 companies. So that's not there's no competition anymore. That's not, you know, that is, and you know, now one company produces content and distributes content. And that's not supposed to happen, right? You're not supposed to have the same people creating content that distribute it. It's an oligopoly now. We don't have, and Rupert Murdoch, right? He owns pretty much everything. So if that guy wants a war, we're going to get a war. And our news media is not liberal. I like to say that. Oh, the people in the news media, they did a survey, and they all voted for, most of them voted for Barack Obama instead of John McCain. Oh, because they didn't vote for a fucking obvious lunatic? That means they're liberal? Maybe we take our cues from the most informed motherfuckers on the planet instead of disregarding them and dismissing what they're doing out of hand because their voting record doesn't line up with our ideology. Maybe we take a cue from the smartest, most informed motherfuckers instead of dismissing them out of hand, which is what they do. And they're not liberal, okay? The news media is corporate, 100,000%. And if anything a newsman says cuts into the bottom line of a corporation, they're not going to be allowed to say it, and they're not going to be allowed to cover it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people have to look at the stories of, Cenk from the Young Turks, his story on
and that's exactly why shows like the Jimmy Dore show get to exist and have such a huge following. Like, I'm shocked. I do a show that I don't talk to other comedians. It's not a fluff show. I talk about shit. It's funny, but we're talking about real issues, and we have a huge. My following for this is 10 times bigger than it was for comedy and everything else, and that's because people are thirsty. The Young Turks, people say, who watches the news on YouTube? I don't know, about 2 billion people, because they're sick. That's why Bernie Sanders is getting 30,000 people to come out to see him talk in Portland, right? Yeah. So. Because people are thirsty for this stuff, because we live in an Orwellian corporate nightmare, and people crave authenticity. and people know they're being fucked over when we bail out Wall Street, when they say we're broke. Yet, and they tell us we don't have money for your schools. There's 40 kids in classrooms, and we don't have money for the veterans. And we don't have money for health care or Social Security or roads or bridges or anything. When they mean we're broke, they don't mean we don't have money for $1 trillion bank bailouts, $1 trillion wars, $1 billion oil subsidies, or prison construction. That's not what they always got money for that shit. Nobody ever says, hey, how are we going to pay for this latest round of bombing at ICE? Oh, we got bomb money. I keep the bomb money right next to our drinking money. Nobody ever touches that shit. We always got bomb money. It's unbelievable. Of course we always got bomb money. Nobody ever brings it up. How are we going to pay for this? Hey, if we're going to give health care to people, the first thing to say, how are we going to pay for this? I don't know. We're the richest country that the face of the earth has ever seen. We still have an economy twice the size of China's. Twice. So when the politicians tell you we're broke and we can't afford health care for everybody or college for everybody for free, they're full of shit, or they're using a Texas math book.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I get in this debate with so many people because people talk about, oh, the issue is welfare and all this stuff. I'm like, first of all, don't get me started about corporate welfare, because they spend more money on subsidies and tax breaks for the rich than they do than they spend on social programs. And who do you really feel bad for? If I had to choose between the two, I'd rather the person who lives in a shitty part of a city getting a little of our tax money. So, and then, because let's be honest, when people are broke, when people are struggling, what do they turn to? Crime. So them getting a little bit of money probably makes the cities a little safer instead of.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, how about we export all the good-paying jobs, replace them with shitty-paying jobs, and add guns? What do you think's going to happen?
Yep.
That's America in a nutshell. We're exporting all our good-paying jobs. We're replacing them with shitty-paying. That's the new American way, by the way. Well, you take good-paying jobs, turn them into shitty jobs, and then ship them to even poorer, more desperate people in another country. And that's called capitalism today. And that's the kind of stuff Bernie Sanders is trying to put a stop to. That's not capitalism. That's called fucking rank exploitation. And that's the shit that Karl Marx said would happen with capitalism. And guess what? It is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just had Thaddeus Russell on, and it's funny because we got in a little bit of a debate because he thinks the state is the issue with everything, and they have a monopoly of violence and all that stuff, which I completely agree with. But I still think the motivation for our foreign policy, the motivation for a lot of this stuff isn't ideology. It's money and power. And I said money and he said power, and personally, I think there's not really much of a difference. It's one and the same. One leads to the other. But absolutely, that's why I think what the Young Turks are doing with trying to take money out of politics is so important, because that's the root of the issue. That if you take money out of politics, and I've had Jesse Ventura on, he kind of said something pretty interesting. He was talking about how if politicians got paid a little more, then maybe they wouldn't be taking so many favors and all that stuff. I'm not sure that would fix the problem, but it's something to look at. And a lot of these, that's the thing. Corporations, politicians, it's all one and the same. Everybody's working for each other. They have, most politicians don't even read the bills. The lobbyists will write the language that they want in the bill. They won't even know what it's for. And so I'm not sure ideology has much to do with it. I think that you look at the last 8 years, the last two presidents, there was not much difference between one and the other. They both.
No, see, that's the thing people don't understand, right? And that's the thing. When Ralph Nader was going to run for the presidency, his father said to him, hey, do you really think we need a third party? And what he said was, no, but I think we need a second. And so Barack Obama proved, right, that he's a toady of Wall Street. He picked Wall Street over the Main Street. They bailed out Wall Street. They didn't bail out the regular person when they could have. He is 100% a toady of Wall Street, Barack Obama. He didn't break up the banks. He didn't rewrite the Dodd-Frank is such a fucking toothless piece of. Anyway, so that's why people like the Young Turks exist. That's why the Jimmy Dore show exists. And so it's actually, it's frustrating to me to see what happens with our corporate media. Here's a perfect example of what you're talking about, money in politics. Donald Trump gets up in front of the biggest audience that ever watched a debate, 24 million people, and he tells everybody how the system is broken and how I buy all these people and they all come to me begging for money, licking my boots. and then they owe me a favor. So he just blew the lid off. He just pulled the curtain back, right? The veil has been drawn, and we now see the ugly underbelly of what it's really happening in politics and why it's not responsive, but it's only responsive to the donors, right? They don't give a shit that 90% of Americans want gun control because 90% of the donors don't. So they don't care, right? So he completely revealed how corrupt the system is. The next Sunday, Chuck Todd had him on Meet the Press. He interviewed him for a whole half an hour. Not once did that come up. You think that would come up? Hey, our political system is rotten at its core. You think Chuck Todd would know, because Chuck Todd is a company man, a corporatist, and that doesn't even register on his radar. That's what a shitty corporate journalist is today. And he wants to ask him about the horse race, and they treat Donald Trump like a celebrity instead of what they should be doing is tearing him down because he's a race-baiting fascist.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, is the only good thing about Donald Trump running, like you said, is those type of curveballs that he'll throw out there, because he doesn't give a fuck, and he has tons of money, he doesn't care, and he'll just say whatever comes to mind. I mean, obviously, I can't believe that he's up on the polls. I don't know if that says something about the rest of the Republicans, how bad they are, or it kind of makes you nervous about the American public, that this guy has basically not stated any detail on any one of his policies and just says all these one-liners, yeah, we're gonna win, and we're gonna be the best, and he sucks, and I'm gonna do this, and and he really doesn't specify anything, and it's amazing because I have friends are like, oh, Donald Trump's kind of making sense, I like some of the things he says. I'm like, what exactly is he saying? He's not saying anything. He's saying a bunch of one-liners, like, so it just it kind of makes me nervous, because it's like, what do people see? Like, are they that easily tricked into this person who's just selling a bunch of bullshit and really has no way of fixing things, apparently hasn't thought out anything, because he obviously, with all his money, he figured he'd have some good consultants and some good, just smart people around him that could put together a plan. But he just wants to go out there and just say all these random one-liners, and that doesn't specify anything. And let's make a bigger wall, and this about immigration and whatnot. And so it's doesn't that scare you a little bit about the American public? The fact that there's that many people who are, I guess, intrigued with him, and at least at this moment look like they're interested in possibly choosing him as the Republican candidate.
Well, I think we've always known that somewhere about a quarter of the Republican Party are just rank, ignorant, race-baiting, vote against their own interests, overly religious maniacs who believe in the end of times, that still support Dick Cheney and think there was weapons of mass destruction and that there's death panel. I mean, these are Benghazi. We all know there's I didn't say this. Brute Bartlett, who served in the George W. Bush's administration, said, quite frankly, there's one political party that has gone completely crazy, and we know which one that is, and that's the Republican Party. And then they get a guy like Donald Trump, who's a classic demagogue, right? So he demagogues these issues. He gets people's racism whipped up, their xenophobia, their hatred for the other. He gets someone. That's exactly what Hitler did. You're not allowed to make Hitler comparisons. That's exactly what he did. He blamed somebody for all their problems, and he promised them that they were going to be great again. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. And he's an over-militarized, and there's some of us amongst us that aren't as good as the rest of us, that aren't real citizens. We gotta thin the herd and get rid of them. He wants to take away your birthright citizenship. Fucking 40% of Los Angeles won't be citizens anymore.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What do you think's going to happen then? Well, then there's going to be a revolt. There's going to be a rebellion. I mean, that's the shit. By the way, this is for real. Every one of the GOP presidential candidates said they want to revoke birthrights, the 14th Amendment. They want to get rid of it. So if you're born here and your parents weren't already a citizen, that means you're not a citizen. So then if you then went on and had a kid, your kids aren't citizens either. So we're going to be deporting millions and millions of people who aren't citizens anymore, who were citizens. And it's exactly what fascism is.
Well, I wasn't born here, and my son was, so Yeah, I mean, I guess
he wouldn't be a citizen unless his mother, right? So if just because you're born here, if your parents aren't citizens, you would now no longer be a citizen.
Yeah, it's just like you said. It is similar to Hitler when you look at the way that you're kind of turning, creating this one ruling class and saying that, and he's basically turning white rich people against everybody else, and really that's not. And like you said before, the crazy thing is that we get all these people debating about Mexicans and immigrants and all this bullshit when we don't look at the obvious of the fact that you can just go online and see how much they're spending on Tomahawk missiles, $5.5 million and on each missile, and you're dropping 20 of them today, in Syria.
Well, what I always tell people is, it's amazing that in the middle of the biggest ass rimming this country's ever gotten from Wall Street and the military-industrial complex, people still have time to be angry at people with no money and no power. So when you're angry at immigrants or people on welfare, you're angry at people with zero money and zero power. They don't even fucking vote. These are the people you think have fucked up our society? The people who have absolutely no power in our society? That's the power of propaganda. And that's Orwell. That he predicted. This is what this is. We're living in it. You said it yourself. People they have to work 2 jobs. They come home, they watch CNN, which is completely straight propaganda. Complete propaganda, which is what CNN is. You're not going to hear the straight dope on there ever, right? That's why Vice exists. That's why the Young Turks exist. That's why Vox exists. That's why the Jimmy Dore show exists. That's why I can do a show like this as a comedian. So again, people go ahead, watch Network. It was explained, what was that, 40 years ago? If you go back and watch that movie with Ned Beatty, he explains it all. There are no countries anymore. There are only corporations. Yeah. No one has allegiance to countries. They have allegiance to corporations. And that's it.
Yeah.
And he didn't get it, and now he does.
No, you're absolutely right. That film, if somebody hasn't seen that film, definitely take a look at it. I know it's old and it's not in high def like we're all used to, but
yeah, guess what? It's more relevant. That movie would never get made today.
You're right. It is more relevant today. I actually have it on DVD, and I've let some friends borrow it. And they're like, "When was this made?" I'm like, "Just watch it." I'm like, "It'll make more sense today than it probably did the day it was made." And like you said, Orwell. You look at just Edward Bernays and his understanding propaganda and understanding how to control the masses. I mean, all that stuff.
Well, and Chomsky wrote Manufacturing Consent. I mean, that's a good starting point. You understand how the media is controlled, how they control you, how people who don't have the same opinions as the corporate mainstream establishment, how they make you feel like you're alone. How that they want you to feel isolated because your opinions and your feelings are never reflected back to you in the mainstream media. And so you think that you're the only one thinking like that.
Yep. And also Adam Curtis' Century of Self. That's another great documentary. I highly recommend people to watch. That'll tell you a little bit of the Edward Bernays story. And, and a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the German propaganda, I mean, Edward Bernays wrote the book Propaganda. I mean, he came up with public relations. He understood how to manipulate people's thoughts, wants, and needs. And a lot of time, and that's the thing, I had somebody on from the documentary The Corporation, which is another great one, about, I mean, just all the money corporations spend on marketing and knowing what colors and what songs and what accents will get you to buy their product and all these things. It's just like the average person doesn't stand a chance against this type of thing because it's like we're talking about, we're too busy with our everyday life and I think that it's perfectly put together when you look at it. You go to college, you're immediately in debt, which means you're a slave to a job the rest of your life, and you don't have any opportunity to pursue passions, your wants, your needs, and then you end up being absolutely miserable. I just told this story recently with Thaddeus Russell, but I'll tell it again because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. But I had the amazing Jonathan on, the comedian, and he talked about how his father worked at a factory. He worked near, I believe he worked near Detroit. And you figure if I told the story enough times, I'd probably remember the details, but I don't. But he worked at a factory near Detroit doing parts for cars and hated his job. Every single day talked about how much he hated his job. And then he finally retired. You figured he'd be happy as fuck, but he ended up croaking soon after. And I think what causes that is the fact that at a young age, like I said, we get stuck, with debt and bills and being a slave to this job. And 99% of your life goes to making this company money, and you don't have any time to pursue happiness or travel or meet people or find out what your passions are that you could try to make a career out of. So what ends up happening is once you do retire, you realize that you have nothing, like that job became your life and you had nothing else to live for. You didn't have a passion. You didn't have hobbies. Because you didn't have time to pursue those things and to find things you enjoy doing. And then it sucks everything out of you. And I think that humans are capable of so much more, and we're capable. That's why when I talk to comedians, musicians, authors, and people who are doing what they love, it's awesome that people are doing that, because I think it's motivation for anybody who's listening to pursue the things you love and don't get stuck in this becoming a machine and just in this cycle of the same old. And I think that's just a dangerous thing. So again, one of those rants I have no idea how I got into, but I'm sure there was a point somewhere in there. But you still there, Jimmy?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Yeah. So you agree with that? You think that, unfortunately, the way society, and that's the thing. Like, I've had people on from Sweden and a band called Beyond All Recognition, and they were talking about how they will actually pay you to go to college. And I looked at them and I'm like, wait. You mean they'll pay for your college? No, they'll pay you to go to college. They'll take over your expenses for food and some, actually give you some money so you can actually afford to not just give you free college, but give you some money so you can actually have somewhat of a income while you're going to college. I mean, that's fucking insane, But here, we still don't have universal health care. We have this, like you said, this Obamacare, that whatever people want to call it, that still sucks and was written by insurance companies and benefits insurance companies. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's why Bernie Sanders, he's making so much sense to people. And I think that people are finally not afraid of that socialist word. I think people hear that word socialism, and for a long time it scared people. But if you just look at the ideas, like in many cases, when you hear these ideologies, if you actually just listen to the idea, you realize that, you know what? Some of what they're saying makes sense. And maybe you shouldn't look at it as, is it socialism or is it capitalism or is it whatever it might be? Just look at the idea. And if it makes sense, then don't let the propaganda that scares you from basically agreeing with anything that might fall in that I guess, blanket of ideas.
I'll just reiterate that the left, there is no liberal, there is no left, there is no liberal media mainstream. It's all corporate. It's and I mean, the farther to the right, the Democrat, Bill Clinton was the death knell for progressiveness and liberal policies. And yeah, paying people to go to college, turns out it's a good thing. Turns out the more educated people you have in your populace, the better fucking community you have. And so there's just this culture, right, that since Ronald Reagan, right, that, and but what's weird, every Republican, they can't stop talking about Ronald Reagan. Not one Democrat ever mentions FDR. They never bring him up. The most successful president we've ever had, the most popular president, they elected him 4 times in a row. They had to change the Constitution so that shit never happened again. That's how popular the guy was. And he stood up to the banks, and he stood up to used to call them the money changers. And so they never do that. So that's what's wrong with the culture in America, right? We need someone to come and explain to us again what real liberalism is, what demand side economics is. FDR believed in you put money in the pockets of workers and then they spend it, and that stimulates an economy, and that's Keynesian economics. That's called demand. We do the opposite now. Since Ronald Reagan, we do supply side, right? So what we do is we give all the money to rich people, and we hope they'll spend it. So if we give rich people who already have as much money as they could ever have, if we just give them more, they'll spend that extra money, and that will stimulate. That's not what happens. What happens is they put that money away or offshore. Okay, they don't put it back into the economy. They don't spend it. They can only buy so many cars. There's a great TED Talk, and it was a band, right? So if you Google on YouTube, BANNED, band TED Talk. It's this millionaire who explains to this whole thing, about why supply side economics doesn't work, why the idea of job creators is just a pretend idea. That's job, nobody creates a job. Right. And that the idea, I've been saying this for, in my book, Your Country's Just Not That Into You. I explain there is no such thing as a free market. People love to say free markets. What they mean is we want to screw over workers. That's what a free market is. I want to screw over worker with no regulations. I want to rig the market because markets are created by people. People act like the markets came from nature, like somehow there's a spring somewhere and the free market comes out of it. No, markets are invented by men. And then guys like Donald Trump and the Koch brothers pay the guys who invent the markets to rig it in their favor. And that's what we call a free market, a rigged system, which is what we have, which is why all the gains the economy makes goes to the upper 1%. The working man hasn't had a raise in America since 1980, fucking coincidentally. So we're living in a rigged system. It's been debunked. The test results are in. Supply side economics does not work, yet Barack Obama is still doing it.
Yeah, and I completely agree.
That's what their job stimulus program was to give was called. What they gave the what is it called, the quantum where they gave all the billions of dollars to the banks. Quantitative easing. That's what they call it. Quantitative. What that means is they took $50 to $80 billion every month for about 3 years, and they gave it to Wall Street for fucking free. That's called quantitative. $50 billion dollars. You know how much money they spend on Race to the Top to gonna fix education? $4 billion. That's for all the education. That's the Race to the Top program. So they give Wall Street $50 billion tax-free dollars, and they hope that they're gonna go lend it to people, and that will help. That will help boost the economy. That didn't happen. All it did was help the balance sheets of the banks, and they put more money in their pockets, and the bankers never their income never skipped a beat, right? But whose did? Everybody else's. So we're living in a plutocracy, right? It's run for a handful of people, and Barack Obama, at the behest of bankers, cracked the heads of Wall Street protesters from coast to coast. That was a Democrat who let that happen. And Democratic mayors ordered their union cops to go out and bust the heads of peaceful protesters who were calling out the fucking corrupt system that we live in. They were doing what you're supposed to do, which is constitutionally protected. And they cracked the heads of those people, and nobody gave a shit. In fact, it was ordered by the same people who were supposed to stand up to them.
And what do you think happens when people become president? Because I had this similar conversation with Thaddeus about, I was saying how it seems like once they become president, then whatever they ran on just goes out the window. And they've been doing that historically forever. If you look at the what was it called? The Untold History of the United States by Oliver Stone, it showed you so many different presidents throughout the years running, and they all had the same type of slogans. They all had the same type of catchphrases. They're all kind of selling you the same bullshit, and you realize that it's just constantly the same thing. And then, basically nobody gives a shit about politics until it's time to vote for the president, and then we vote for one, and then he sucks, and then we just 4 years later we'll vote for somebody else, and then he sucks, and we just keep going in this cycle. But what do you think that there's actual? I mean, obviously there's people like Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, who I truly believe, even if you don't agree with everything they say, they're real people who have real ideas. But a lot of these people like Obama, who I think a lot of us, because of our hatred for Bush and what he was doing, really wanted to hope that he was going to be different. Do you think once he becomes president that he was either a really good politician of selling us bullshit, or once you become president you realize you have no power, and then basically that's what ends up happening? Like, well, why do you think there's such a change from people when they're running to what they end up doing once they become president? I mean, obviously the most obvious example of that is how he ran on shutting down Gitmo, and he still didn't do that. Do you think he really wanted to and couldn't, or was just one of those, he's just a great politician of just selling us nonsense?
I think that he was a great salesman. He knew that Hillary Clinton was to the right, so he ran to her left. I think it was all political calculations. I think he was always a centrist, a corporatist. I told people, my thing is, you don't get to be the first black editor of the Harvard Law Review by being the black guy who makes white people uncomfortable, right? You get that position because you're the black guy who doesn't stir shit up and who makes white rich people comfortable with your blackness, and you're always compromising them. You're always showing how reasonable you are. You're always showing how you see their point of view. And that's exactly who Barack Obama was, and that's exactly who he is. He's always wanted the approval and friendship. I mean, Cornel West talks about this stuff, and his whole life has been that, right? And so he's one of them. That's the whole thing. People think that he was against the banker. He's not. He's one of them.
Yeah, he took tons of money from Goldman Sachs. He's not
separate from the system like Bernie Sanders. He is the system. He always wanted to be one of them, and he's one of them. He wanted to be accepted by the rich white bankers, the mainstream establishment, and he doesn't even need to be accepted. He's one of them. He couldn't be more mainstream establishment.
But what do you think of Bernie? Like, okay, you talk about Bernie Sanders, but one thing that seems to bother me a little bit is just how he seems to purposely avoid any real foreign policy conversation. What do you think that's all about?
Say it again.
He seems to ignore any conversation about foreign policy. He seems to not have, at least publicly, not a distinct opinion or strategy on what's going on and how you know what
our strategy should be on ISIS. Get the fuck out of the Middle East.
Oh, I completely agree.
What is our strategy? Our strategy has always been to fuck shit up more. That's all we do. We never fixed a fucking problem with bombs, and we never will.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, name one country that we've, like you said, we've fixed by bombing them or evading them.
Right.
But if that's his opinion, why hasn't he publicly said something about it?
I don't. You know what? I don't know. I guess I get so excited to hear him talk about all his domestic issues. It's kind of thrilling, and I just kind of cross my fingers and hope that he's going to be right on foreign policy, because he's so right on everything else. I mean, he's exactly what a politician looks like who's not bought and paid for.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. He doesn't have that Mitt Romney perfect hair and perfect look, which to me, it always seems just like a cookie cutter politician. They all look the same. They all sound the same. They talk the same. So it is nice to get somebody who seems like they have real ideas and real opinions and stuff. But again, this kind of, it makes me a little nervous because you look at like the TPP, you look at all these things that are huge issues, and it makes you wonder, okay, if you want to talk about foreign policy, maybe it is like I talked about before, like this idea that once you become president, you realize you have very little control over what really happens. And you look at a lot of the presidents, they have a lot of the same consultants, they have a lot of the same, they work with a lot of the same think tanks, a lot of the same people, and it doesn't really matter who's president. It always seems like our foreign policy more or less stays the same. And it kind of makes me nervous that he hasn't talked about it, because it's a huge issue, even though our local social issues are huge. But we'll have a lot more, like you said, we'll have a lot more money to fix our social issues if we stop spending billions of dollars on wars overseas, military weapons. I mean, you talk to people in the military, they're getting new tanks when they still have, tons of tanks laying around with dust on them, and they're getting all this extra equipment. They're selling weapons to countries that are on the human rights list and countries that have known terrorists in them, and they're getting a hold of U.S. weapons, and then we're spending more U.S. taxpayer money on fighting those people who have our weapons. So it's one of those things where I just feel like a lot of those social issues, like you said, we spend so much money on military and defense that for him to even start fixing some of our local issues, like schools and making college more affordable, you'd have to cut some of the foreign policy spending. And I'm just surprised that he hasn't linked it to and talked about it. And that kind of, like I said, that kind of scares me a little bit, because it makes you wonder if they really do have any control. Because obviously a president's only there for 4 years, the max 8 years. But if they're there for one term, 4 years, a lot of these ideas and opinions, and I mean, look at what happened with the neocons. I mean, a lot of these things, these were well-established strategies to destabilize the Middle East and have control of natural resources. I don't think it's a coincidence that some of the poorest countries in the world are rich with natural resources, and countries like the U.S. and Britain, who don't really have any natural resources, don't export anything, are the rich countries who basically capitalize on the natural resources in these countries. So yeah, I guess it's just one of those things where I guess we can wait and see what he says, but it definitely it's a little concerning for me from the outside looking in.
Yeah, it's there's no better option. That's the only, it's like, wow, if his foreign policy totally disappoints me, I'm still voting for Bernie Sanders. It's just there's nobody ever, because I know Hillary Clinton is a war hawk, and I know the Republicans are all fucking maniacs. So there's no way he could be worse.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's unfortunate that he has to run as a Democrat, or you have to run as a Republican to even be in the conversation. Like you talked about Ralph Nader, or you look, a lot of people complain that he's the reason why Clinton won, because he took votes away from, the Bush people who would have voted for Bush and all that stuff. But, it just sucks that they have such a stranglehold. And I would love to have a third party and see a third party in debates and stuff like that. It's unfortunate that it doesn't seem like that's ever going to happen. But I'm hoping that with the young people who were so on board the Obama camp and was such a fan of his and really were, I guess, fell for his bullshit, I'm hoping that a lot of them do look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, or somebody who's different and not more of the same, and jump on board somebody like that. Because a lot of people think that, okay, he'll make a little bit of noise now, but in the long run, he might not actually win. It might still be a Jeb Bush and Clinton running at the end of the day, which I hope that's not the case. And I hope that people get angry enough, the fact that Obama you look at what he's doing with the TPP, fast tracking the TPP. You look at the drone attacks. You look at not shutting down Gitmo, the prosecution of whistleblowers. I mean, it just, I hope people open their eyes and they finally realize that, like, holy shit, like, we're just being sold nonsense over and over again. And we have to look at somebody who maybe because I remember when Ron Paul ran, one thing that I would get a lot when I would talk to people about Ron Paul, they're like, oh, he's too extreme. His foreign policy is too extreme. These views are too different than what we're used to. And I feel like that's a well-played game, this idea that we need somebody who's kind of different, but not too extremely different, because then that would never work. And, you see the same thing with Bernie Sanders. People are like, oh, well, he's a socialist, so that idea is, his ideas are too extreme. That's never going to work. You look at socialist countries, they never work. But capitalist countries... You
mean like Germany?
Yeah.
The strongest economy. They have free college. Everybody gets free college. Everybody gets health care. Strong unions. What are you talking about? That's the most, so that's all bullets. Again, that's just bull. That's because we're bordered by Canada and we're bordered by Mexico. So if we had like another border where we had Germany, we had France, and by the way, Germans work even less than people in France do, and they have a stronger economy. Again, so we would know all these things, but we don't, because we're not bordered by other countries, and we get almost no media and no travel, right? So that's why Americans are so goddamn ignorant, and why we get more of a capitalistic nightmare here than anywhere else.
Well, it's funny that they say that those socialism didn't work. Like you said, Germany's a perfect example, and I guess other people would bring up, well, look at Cuba, or look at Venezuela, or other countries, Spain or Portugal, who's struggling right now. And those are examples of maybe it not working. But at the end of the day, like, capitalism obviously hasn't worked. Look at the debt we're in. Look at how shitty our city schools are, our public schools. Look at our infrastructure, our bridges, our roads. I mean, so how do people measure this? Because if this is what they call capitalism working, then I don't want capitalism, because apparently all the money is just, like you said, funneling up to the top. So I mean, how can people argue that capitalism works?
Well, that's because we have a rig. Our capitalism as needs to be broken up again. Every once we had great regulation of the banks. It was called the New Deal. Yeah. And we had a template for how to run a society, and of course the motherfuckers with the money eventually rigged the system again. They got rid of all that stuff. They got rid of Glass-Steagall. They deregulated the banks, right? So now people they're not investing in America anymore, creating jobs here. It's all about money. And so, we need that Teddy Roosevelt. And when he came along, he did the antitrust, which means he broke up monopolies. and that's what we need again. We have monopolies again. We have all the media companies, and that's the biggest thing. We need to break up the media giants. I think that's a big start. And how do you do that? Is you got to get money out of politics. And how do we do that? Is we have to pass a constitutional convention. And there's a lot of people. Wolf-pack.com is a organization I'm a part of. And we actually get results. California passed. So what you have to do is you have to get 35 states to agree to hold a constitutional convention around a single idea. And the idea is to get money out of politics and have public financing of campaigns, which would save us a lot of money in the long run. And so we have big states already on board. We have little states on board. So we have a bunch of states already that have signed this legislation. California, Vermont, I think Illinois even. So there's lots of states that are coming around. And that's what we need to do, because there's nothing will get done. And this is exactly after Sandy Hook, after the Newtown shooting, 90% of Americans wanted some kind of gun legislation. We didn't get it. So that was the moment right there. You're like, oh, okay, so we really don't live in a representative democracy. These people really only represent the interests of the donors, of the donor class in America. And that's really what's broken. And so we got to get away from that. FDR famously said that never before in the history of this country has money been more organized in their opposition and their hatred towards me. And he said, I welcome their hate. Now, you would never hear Barack Obama say that about fucking Wall Street. You would never hear him say, they hate me and I welcome their hate. Ever. You'll never hear a modern day politician say that, except maybe Bernie Sanders. And so that's who I'm going for. We already have a template how to fix things. It's called the New Deal. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already invented it once. It's called the New Deal. Let's go back. Let's break up the banks. Let's break up the huge media companies. And let's start there. Okay? And I would say break up the oil companies too. So I would start there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thanks, Jimmy, so much for your time. I really love your passion. I love... a lot of people talk about, maybe you're a political comedian or whatnot, but I think there's actually a lot of more comedians who talk about these type of social issues. I think you get more into politics a little bit, but we're all talking about the same thing. We're all talking about social issues. I mean, when Chris Rock talks about there's no money in a cure, there's money in a pill you take. I mean, that's a social issue. That's talking about big pharma. That's talking, so it's funny how certain comedians get that label and others don't, even though they really do talk about social issues. And but I think we need more comedians like yourself, and I love the fact that it's a great time for stand-up comedy anyways, because there's so many great comedians out right now. But I love the fact that there seems to be some comedians out there who are using their platform and their talent to not just make people laugh, which is I think a gift that you have, and I think it's awesome that you can share that with people, because obviously with so many people struggling right now, it's nice to turn to comedy to laugh and kind of forget about our shitty lives when working 50, 60 hours a week to be broke. So I think it's awesome what comedians do, and they give comfort to so many people. But it's also awesome to get some comedians who talk about real issues. So thank you so much. For people who don't know about his book, you can find it everywhere, and it's called Your Country Is Just Not That Into You. And I think wasn't that kind of that was influenced by George Carlin always saying they aren't into you?
George Carlin would say you're not part of the club. It's a club, and you're not in it. That's
what it was. Yeah. So yeah, to definitely check out his book. Check out his. You can find his show on any podcast app, iTunes or wherever, and it's fucking hilarious. So if you want to hear some news and also get a good laugh while you're doing it, it's an awesome resource. So thanks a lot, Jimmy. I really, really appreciate it. Keep doing the great work you're doing. I'm a huge fan of the Young Turks, and I'll keep checking you out, and hopefully we have you on again in the future.
Okay, thanks, brother. It was my pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jimmy. Enjoy your weekend.
You too. Bye-bye, Rickard.
Believe in the ripple effect.